Elizabeth I, often called the Virgin Queen, was one of England's greatest and most influential monarchs. She reigned from 1558 to 1603, overseeing a golden age in English history. Elizabeth was the daughter of Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn, and her reign marked a period of political stability, artistic flourishing, and exploration that forever shaped England's future. Despite the challenges she faced as a female ruler in a male-dominated world, Elizabeth led her nation with intelligence, determination, and grace. When Elizabeth I passed away in 1603, her death marked the end of the Tudor dynasty, and she was buried in Westminster Abbey in London. Her final resting place is next to her half-sister, Mary VIII, in a tomb within the Abbey's Lady Chapel. Over the centuries, Elizabeth's grave has been disturbed several times, sparking curiosity and intrigue. Born on September 7, 1533, at Greenwich Palace, Elizabeth was the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Her birth was highly anticipated, as Henry VIII desperately hoped for a male heir. When Elizabeth was born instead of a son, her father was disappointed. Anne Boleyn fell out of favour, and less than 3 years after Elizabeth's birth, Anne was executed on charges of treason, adultery, and incest. Elizabeth's early life was filled with uncertainty. She was declared illegitimate after her mother's death, and her place in the royal line of succession was in question. Despite this, she received an excellent education, studying languages, history, philosophy, and the arts. Elizabeth was highly intelligent and became fluent in several languages, including Latin, Greek, French, and Italian. After the death of her half-brother, Edward VI, and the turbulent reign of her half-sister, Mary I, Elizabeth ascended to the throne in 1558. Her reign would go on to become one of the most celebrated in English history, often referred to as the Elizabethan era. Elizabeth I's reign marked a time of great cultural, political, and economic transformation in England. She ruled during a period of religious conflict between Catholics and Protestants, but she skillfully navigated these tensions, establishing the Elizabethan religious settlement, which created a middle ground between Catholic and Protestant practices. One of Elizabeth's most significant challenges was the Spanish Armada. In 1588, Philip II of Spain sent a massive fleet of ships to invade England, but the English navy, with the help of storms and strategic leadership, managed to defeat the Armada. This victory solidified England's position as a dominant naval power and brought Elizabeth even greater prestige. During Elizabeth's reign, English explorers like Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh ventured to new lands, and England began to establish itself as a global empire. Culturally, the Elizabethan era saw the flourishing of English literature and drama, with figures like William Shakespeare and Christopher Marlowe creating works that are still celebrated today. Elizabeth was known for her sharp political instincts, her charismatic leadership, and her ability to maintain control over her court and kingdom. She never married, a choice that earned her the nickname the Virgin Queen, and her refusal to name a successor kept the court in suspense until her final days. Elizabeth I ruled England for 45 years, but by the early 1600s, her health had begun to decline. In her later years, Elizabeth had become more isolated, mourning the deaths of many of her closest advisors and friends. She experienced bouts of depression, and her once sharp and vibrant personality began to fade. In March 1603, Elizabeth fell seriously ill. She refused to be attended by physicians and spent her final days in a state of melancholy, sitting on cushions in her palace at Richmond. On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth I passed away at the age of 69, bringing an end to the Tudor dynasty. With no children to succeed her, the crown passed to her cousin, James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. Elizabeth's death marked the end of a remarkable era in English history. She was mourned by her people, and her funeral was a grand and solemn affair, reflecting the importance of her reign. Elizabeth I's funeral took place on April 28, 1603, over a month after her death. The Queen's body was placed in a lead coffin and transported from Richmond Palace to Whitehall, where it lay in state before the funeral procession. Her coffin was covered with purple velvet and adorned with the royal crown, sceptre, and orb. The funeral procession was one of the largest ever seen in England, with over 1,000 people in attendance, including nobles, courtiers, and foreign dignitaries. Elizabeth's coffin was carried through the streets of London, from Whitehall to Westminster Abbey, where a funeral service was held in her honour. The streets were lined with mourners, and the atmosphere was sombre. The nation bid farewell to their beloved Queen. Elizabeth was buried in Westminster Abbey's Lady Chapel, the same location where her half-sister, Mary I, had been interred in 1558. Despite their differences in life, the two sisters were united in death, sharing a tomb beneath a grand monument. The tomb, erected by James I, features a white marble effigy of Elizabeth I, lying beside Mary I, symbolizing the union of the Protestant and Catholic branches of the Tudor family. Elizabeth's tomb remained untouched for centuries, but in 1670, more than 60 years after her death, her coffin was opened for the first time. The occasion was not one of historical inquiry, but of necessity. At the time, Westminster Abbey was undergoing repairs, and workmen needed to move the coffins in the Lady Chapel to carry out the renovations. When Elizabeth's coffin was opened, it was reported that her body was well preserved, thanks to the lead lining of the coffin. However, the coffin had decayed in parts, and the workers had to be careful not to damage the remains of the Queen. Her effigy, made of white marble, remained intact above her tomb, watching over her resting place. The opening of Elizabeth's coffin stirred public interest in the Queen's burial and her final resting place. However, no detailed examinations of her remains were conducted at the time, and the coffin was resealed after the renovations were completed. In 1879, nearly 300 years after Elizabeth's death, Westminster Abbey's Chapter House initiated a project to investigate the tombs of the kings and queens buried in the abbey. The goal of the project was to gather information about the historical figures entombed in the abbey and to assess the condition of their burial sites. Elizabeth's coffin was once again opened during this investigation, and this time, a more detailed examination of her remains was conducted. The team found that the coffin was in poor condition, with parts of the lead lining having deteriorated over the centuries. Inside, the body of Elizabeth I had been reduced to bones, but several notable features were still visible. One of the most significant discoveries was the size of Elizabeth's skeleton. Despite her commanding presence as Queen, Elizabeth was relatively small in stature, standing just over 5 feet tall. Her teeth were still intact, although worn, and her long, narrow fingers were a testament to the elegance for which she was known in life. The investigation also revealed evidence of the embalming process used on Elizabeth's body. The Queen's body had been embalmed shortly after her death, a common practice for royalty at the time. The embalmers had removed her internal organs, and the body had been treated with preservatives before being placed in the lead coffin. Although the investigation did not uncover any major surprises, it provided valuable insight into the condition of Elizabeth's remains and the burial practices of the Tudor era. After the examination was complete, the coffin was once again sealed, and Elizabeth's bones were left to rest in peace. Elizabeth's tomb, shared with her half-sister, Mary I, is a testament to the complex and often difficult relationship between the two queens. In life, they represented opposing religious factions, Elizabeth, the Protestant, and Mary, the Catholic. But in death, They were united beneath the same monument. The inscription on their tomb reads, "Partners both in throne and grave, here rest we two sisters, Elizabeth and Mary, in the hope of one resurrection." This inscription reflects the reconciliation of their differences in death and serves as a reminder of the challenges both women faced during their reigns. I hope you liked watching this video. Do subscribe to our channel Medieval Mind for more videos like this.